Hello and welcome to chapter 18 of this Flutter course. In previous chapters, we've talked a lot about login and registration views. And we've also talked about integration with Firebase. We now have pretty much like our login and register view. Well, I don't want to say we've got them down, but um, we have a basic login and a basic registration view. If you remember from the previous chapter, we kind of left the application in a state that if the application detected that you were a logged in user and that you had a verified email address, then we showed kind of like a dirty done text on the screen. And I can bring the screen up on my Android phone here. And you see we kind of left it in this state. And I'll bring the code up as well, so you just get reminded of what we were doing. So we left the application in this state that if the user wasn't null, meaning that the user was present and that his or her email address was actually verified, we simply did a print statement in there. And we left it like that, meaning that since our builder function of, let me actually bring up the right caption as well. Since the builder function of the future builder requires that you return a widget by moving your mouse over it, you can actually see that it says required widget. You need to return a widget from that function. Since it requires that, what we did is just we put a return const text at the end of all our if statements. So if none of these were present there, we're still returning a text, okay? And since that was there, and in this user email verified, we're not returning a widget, then the code falls through to this line, meaning that if you're a logged in user and you're verified, then we're returning the text of done. So we need to kind of now start, because you see, okay, before I say that sentence, now that we have handled the email verification view. So if you're a logged in user but your email isn't verified, we display the verified email. And if you aren't registered, meaning that like you don't have a user, then we show the login view. Since we've got those down, what we need to do now is to work on the actual main UI of our application, because what you can see here that says done, this should be the main UI of our application. So users who are logged in and their emails are verified should see the main UI of the application. So in this chapter, we're actually going to work on the main UI of our application and then allow the user to log out from our application as well. So I'm just looking at my notes to ensure I'm telling you all the stuff that I plan to tell you. So without further ado, maybe we could actually get started with that. So let's go into our main Dart file here and create a new widget. So I'm going to bring it up here. And we're going to create a new stateful widget called notes view. And this notes view, just imagine that it is the main UI of the application for people who are logged in, okay? So as I mentioned before, STF to create a stateful widget, and then we call it notes view, I believe. All right. Now, what we need to do, let's see. It doesn't even really have a scaffold or anything, so maybe that's what we need to do. I'm just gonna go here. So let's go create a scaffold and an app bar for it. All right. So we go in here into where we're returning a container at the moment. We just say we want a scaffold. And for our scaffold, we want an app bar. And the app bar should just be an app bar with a title of const text. And we just say, what should we call it? I don't think I've got notes for that, to be honest with you. Let's just call it your notes or something like that. I could actually go and have a look at my notes to see what I've called it in that where I was actually preparing this course for you. And I can see I've written main UI. So let's just do that. Let's just say main UI in here. Okay, so we have a scaffold in there. So, and it just says main UI and the body is empty at the moment, so there's no body. And if you remember from previous chapters, when you return a scaffold and an app bar, all it does is that it creates kind of like, depending on your theme, but usually with the light theme, it creates a bluish status bar and an app bar with white text for the app bar's title, and the rest of the content of the screen is just going to be white. So it's kind of like an empty container kind of. Okay, now we have that in place, and we are going to go to our future builder here in our home page. And instead of doing this returning text done, we're going to remove that. And now we're going to get an error saying that, well, the case should not complete normally. Try adding break or return. And that's basically, it's complaining in this line of code here. For me in line 41, it may be another line of code for you. So it's saying that, well, one of the cases of your like the entire block of code that you're placing in here, it doesn't always end with a return. And that's exactly right, because in the case of a user being email verified, we're not returning a widget. And what we're going to do in here, we're just going to say return const note view. Okay. All right. And I'm going to press Command S there. And now we did a hot reload, and you can see the main UI of the application. And in my notes, I can see here that we're going to go and place a little text in our scaffold here. And for your app bar, we're good to go. For the body, let's just say const text hello world. Okay, like that. So now we can see the hello world displayed right there. I can see I have a lot of notes, to be honest with you, with this chapter. So I'm really making sure that I'm looking at my notes while I'm giving you the content, to ensure that you're getting all the information that I plan for you to get. So I apologize if I'm looking a lot at my notes. It's just to, it's just to deliver the best content for you, to be honest. Okay, so we've done that. Hello world. Now, what we need to talk about is the AppBar class, and I've provided a link here for you, which I'm going to open on my screen and then bring to this screen so you can also see it. Increase the size a little bit, and perhaps also do this layout so you can see it, the caption as well. So you can see for AppBar, the documentation just says a material design AppBar. An AppBar consists of a toolbar and potentially other widgets. So all you need to do really, all you need to know about an app bar is that it is able to display various widgets. I mean, pretty much everything in Flutter is a widget, so an app bar isn't an exception. And an app bar consists of various components. The default app bar allows you to display a title, as you can see here, and the title by default has its own styling. It means that it has its own left and top and bottom margins. So by default, it's like displayed vertically in the middle of your app bar, as you can see in the main UI of our application. So pretty much every material component, pretty much everything you display on the screen has a theme. Okay, and an app bar has its own theme and it has its own capabilities. So what we're going to use the app bar in the main UI of our application is not only to display a title, but is also to display a little button to the far right that the user can click on or tap on. In our case, tap on, because the users are going to run our application on mobile devices, so they're going to tap. And if we allow our application to be run on desktops, then they'll be able to click and maybe even tap on if they're running, for instance, Microsoft's what is it called, Surface Book or Surface tablets. So this is what an app bar is, as is like the gist of it. And there's information here in the documentation. You can see here it says there's a leading space, and then or you can actually put a widget in the leading, and then there's a title, and then some other actions. And these are the things we're actually going to use actions in this in this section, in this chapter of our Flutter course. So you can see here, for instance, there's actually code on how to configure an app bar with some button. You can see you can press the button and then you get a snack bar right here. Okay, so keep this in mind. You can have a look at the documentation. I really actually suggest that you do that. And you can spend some time reading through the documentation, but I don't think you need to get absorbed in the documentation so much, but just have a look at the various parts of an app bar and try it for yourself. Okay, so I can see that I've told you about the documentation. I'm gonna move past that. So that part is done. And now what I think we need to do is to talk about this print statement and why we were getting an error here. You see, print, if I put a print here, and if I say print hello world, you usually get information here saying avoid print calls in production code. Okay, so before we move past this, because you've probably seen this quite a lot in this course, that I've placed print statements, and then we can, like for instance, if I bring up the debug console and just do Command S on my Mac or Control S on Linux and Windows in order to hot reload, you'll see, let's see, actually email verify hot reload, hot restart here. Oops, see, I can see that it crashed. That's okay. So I'm gonna go and bring up SCR CPY again. And these things do happen, and that's completely fine. So, and I'm gonna need to run the application again because I actually lost my connection with that device. But while that is doing its job, I'm gonna tell you also about print versus a log. You see, print is usually called a poor man's debugger, in that if you're not a software developer, you probably don't know about even debugging and what that means. But what debugging is essentially is where there's a problem in your source code, but you don't know really where. So you try to step through various lines of code in your application in order to find what the problem is. So a lot of times when people don't really, either they don't have the time to debug or they believe that the debugger is just too slow, they start putting print statements in their application. And by putting print statements in their application, they can kind of track where the application is going through the various lines of code. And if, for instance, they put a print statement in a place of code where they didn't expect the application to end up, and then they'll be like, okay, I ended up in this code block I shouldn't have, so let me just check why I ended up here. So it's kind of called a poor man debugging, because print is a piece of code that you actually place in your code. So sometimes print isn't the desirable thing to do. In banking applications, for instance, you should be extremely careful what you print, because these things get logged, and you may think, well, okay, they get logged on that phone. What is the problem with that? The problem with logging things, even if it's on the phone, is that you must know that the operating systems, Android and iOS, usually like the most popular ones right now, they keep track of your logs. So these logs are actually stored in a place on the operating system, so you can actually read them back later. So there is a buffer. So this information that your application may be printing to the console isn't completely private, except that it is stored on the phone, even if it's for a short while it gets replaced by a new buffer. If your phone ends up in the wrong hands, someone can actually get a hold of your logs. So imagine a banking application logs your like login information, username, password, all that detail. Even if it's only for that application, you may think, but someone else, it may actually end up in the wrong hands. So that's what this information is telling you. Avoid print calls in production code. Okay, so there is another way of doing this. Instead of doing print, you can actually use log in your code. And I believe we're actually going to talk about in this chapter, I think we're going to talk about logging. So let me have a look here in my notes. Yes, we're actually going to talk about logging instead of printing. So just keep that in mind, that there's a better way of doing print statements if that's what you want to do, if that's what you want to see on the console. So we're gonna fix that soon. And this is, you see, hello world information that was printed by this print statement. Okay, so sorry about that. That was just a little detour, but I thought it was necessary to tell you, especially if you haven't done software development before. Okay, we've done the return notes view in the home page. We shouldn't have any prints in the home page, and you can see this is our home page right now, and we don't have any print statements. Let me change the view a little bit. All right. So, so what I'm gonna now describe to you is that we need an enumeration that describes our various AppBar items that the user can click on. You see, when we create our AppBar, this AppBar will in itself be able to display something called a pop-up. All right. So I haven't shown you how this is going to work by the end of this chapter, so it may be a little bit difficult to understand, but just imagine that we have our UI here, and what we need to achieve in this chapter is to place a little button here with like a dot dot dot, either horizontally or vertically. I don't really know what the icon is going to be. So some sort of a button here, upon pressing which the user will get a little fine, nice, like a drop down. And in this drop down, then you can place various items like logout, settings, blah, blah, blah. So imagine we have a drop down by pressing that button, and upon pressing the logout button, then we're going to display a dialog to the user saying, are you sure you want to log out from the application? So this works very nicely. I mean, before I say this works very nicely, maybe I should explain that by pressing each one of these items in the pop-up menu that we're going to display to the user, we are going to get a callback from the system saying, oh, this item got pressed. And you need to tell the system what this item is. You can either give it like an integer, like a numerical value, or a string, or even better, you can give it an enumeration value. If you remember from the chapters where we talked about Dart basics, we talked about enumerations and why they're important, and that they make things very easy, because when you specify an enumeration and put cases in your enumeration, and then you let me actually change this to also do not disturb. Sorry about that. I just remember that. And you give those enumeration values to your pop-up menu items by the user pressing on any of those items. You will then get that enumeration value back. So you can do a switch statement in your callback and say, oh, which item got called? Was it this case of the enumeration? So instead of you doing like integer comparisons or string comparisons, you can actually use enumerations, which make your life a lot easier. So we are going to talk about that soon. As you can see, an enumeration that describes our pop-up, and we're going to work on that soon. Okay, we talked about that. All right, so now let's talk about pop-up menu button versus pop-up menu item. And as you can see, the caption says they're usually used together. And let's go actually bring up Safari here. And I'm going to say pop-up menu item Flutter. And I'm going to bring up the documentation up here. Okay. So we can have a look at it together. As you can see, it says an item in a material design pop-up menu. So this is the actual menu item itself. So if you imagine we're displaying a drop-down menu, every item in that pop-up menu item is of type, every item in that pop-up menu is of type pop-up menu item. All right. And you can see a pop-up menu item in itself has, a pop-up menu item is a generic. In advanced Dart chapter, we also talked about generics, and what a generic item, in this case, a pop-up menu item, basically is that it has a value of this type that it says is of. In this case, a pop-up menu item is Y farther. Pop-up menu item is of type Y farther. Now we don't really know why farther is, but it could just be an enumeration. Okay, and you can see here now, after you've decided that a pop-up menu item carries a value of this type, then its value should actually be specified. And I can see that there's a case called harder in that enumeration that you've assigned to your pop-up menu item. Okay. Now, what is a pop-up menu button? So let's search here, pop-up menu button. Okay, let's go into the documentation here, and you can see it says displays a menu when pressed and calls on selected when the menu is dismissed. All right, so um, what you need to know is that the pop-up menu button is the actual button that we will place on kind of on our app bar, upon pressing which it will display a menu. And you can see here in the code, you see here the pop-up menu button has an unselected callback, and it has an item builder, and items inside the pop-up menu item then are the items inside the pop-up menu button are of type pop-up menu item. So imagine then you have the pop-up menu button as like the parent, and then you will have its item builder, and each of which of these items are of type pop-up menu item. And that's exactly what we're actually going to do in this chapter. Okay, I'm going to close that window. I don't think we need the Safari window here. So now, I think I explained this part of the caption a little bit just now about when we talked about the pop-up menu item. But you can see here I've said pop-up menu item has a value. Let's look at the code for pop-up menu item. So maybe we could just actually write here pop-up menu item in our code. And I'm going to command click on it. And you can also see that a pop-up menu item has this property called value, okay? And as you can see, a pop-up menu item, as I mentioned before, is a generic class that carries a value of type T. And type T is basically, when you see T in generics, it just means something that you specified. So anything that's specified inside the less than and greater than signs is a generic name, which then gets replaced at compile time with the type that you as a programmer specify. Okay, so that's the code for the pop-up menu item, and you're more than welcome to drill down more into that code to understand it better. So let's then go and create our enumeration that we've now talked about. And I'm just going to go in here right above the notes view. And let's then define an enumeration called MenuAction. And in there, we're going to have a case called Logout. Okay. So let's say enum MenuAction, we said we're going to call it. And then we have a case called Logout in there. So if I do Command S to hot reload, then nothing happens. And the Dart formatter, I can actually see they format our code very well for us. So the next part that we need to take care of is to actually display our pop-up menu button. You can see in Notes app view state AppBar, create a pop-up menu button of type MenuAction. So in the AppBar, in order for us to be able to display a little action there, we need to actually go to the AppBar here. And you can see there's a property called actions, which is, it says it's a list of widgets. All right, so we're going to say we need actions there, okay? I'm also just going to ensure that I have everything here so I can see the code as well and my notes. I can take in my notes that we've talked about things like the menu action. All right, and now we're going to create the pop-up menu button. All right, so you see the action as we saw in the source code on the website that I displayed to you as the documentation. Inside the actions of our app bar, then we're going to create items of type pop-up menu button. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Pop-up menu button. All right, and then you can see it has an item builder. Okay, and I think it's actually an item builder and also unselected. So let's first actually take care of the unselected. So I'm going to put unselected command space in Visual Studio Code on Mac and control space in Linux and Windows in order to get this dialog. Get some help from Visual Studio Code to complete this code for us. You can see upon selected, it's going to return the value to us. And we're telling Dart in here that our pop-up menu button actually manages values of type MenuAction, all right, which is what we specified right here. Okay, And you can see we're getting an error saying that the named parameter item builder is required. Okay, and we'll provide that now. So let's go and create a item builder here. Get help from Visual Studio Code with the same command that I mentioned to you before. And in here, then we're going to create a constant of a pop-up menu item. And we're going to say that this menu item actually manages values of type MenuAction as well. Okay. And we're going to say, according to the documentation, if you remember, every pop-up menu item has a value. So a value associated with it, which then in turn gets passed to this unselected function when this pop-up menu item is tapped. Okay. So then we're going to say, in this case, it has the value of MenuAction logout. And its child is just going to be a text that says log out. Okay. And as a const as well. Actually, the entire thing is a const, so we don't have to do that. Okay. So we just, let me have a look. Item builder, menu actions, const. The body might return normally. Okay. Okay, I see. Because the item builder, if we move our mouse over it, if I move the mouse over item builder, you can actually see that it needs a list of pop-up menu entry. And you can see pop-up menu item, if you go to its code, is actually of type pop-up menu entry. So the problem we're seeing here is that it says you aren't returning a list, but you're just returning an item. So we're going to say return a list. And in here, we just say return that item. Okay. Like that. Can we actually make that entire list const? So yeah, that works as well. Okay, I'm gonna do Command S, and what you'll see here now is we've actually added logout. And you'll see here now, by pressing this, then we'll get a beautiful pop-up menu here, and there is a logout item in it. All right. So that logout text there is the child of our pop-up menu item. So don't worry. I mean, don't get confused with the child and the value. What you need to know is that the child is what the user sees and the value is what you as a programmer see. Because when the user then taps on that item, your unselected is going to get called, and then we'll get that value. So just to test that, let's go back to our print statement and say value. And I'm going to bring up the console here, going to clear it, and I'm going to change the UI layout a little bit so you see it better. I'm going to do Command S, and then I'm going to tap on this logout button. Poof. You'll see now our unselected got called, and the logout value, which was what you associated with your pop-up menu item, got printed here and got sent to the unselected. Okay, so we've done that part. We've handled it with double quotes. We haven't really handled, but we're just printing its value right now. Okay. So I'm just going to go through some of the things that I plan to talk to you about. Okay. All right. So we can see that the print statement is doing its job. So in the previous part of this chapter, I talked about why print usually isn't a good idea. And there is a better way of doing print, and that is with logging. So Dart itself comes pre-packed with a package called developer. And you can easily import developer. And inside the developer tools for Dart, there is a good function called log. And you can use log, which is a more trustworthy and more even configurable version of print. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So in your import statements, let me increase the size of the screen a little bit so you see it better. Say import Dart, from Dart import developer. Okay. Now, I haven't talked so much about import statements before, but import is actually configurable as well. So in here, for instance, if you look at the code inside import this Dart developer, there's a lot of stuff that you might not need in your application. Okay. So by importing a package or a library in your program, you're pretty much importing everything that that package also imports. So in this case, extension, profiler, service, timeline. And these things will then be available in your workspace just by you pressing, for instance, for me, is control space on my Macintosh. So all these symbols will then be available right here. So there's tons and tons of things that are available right now in your application without you having to do anything, just because you imported quite a lot of things. Now, by importing the Dart developer package in this case, also you're making all those symbols available kind of like globally inside this file at least. And some developers don't like that. Some developers kind of like to limit the amount of symbols available and only have the symbols available that they actually work with. Okay. And because of this, there is a good functionality for import in Dart where you can say show. And by doing show, you are telling Dart that you only want to import a specific part of this package. So the specific part that you're interested in is a function called log. Now, after doing this, you can basically go to your application and then say log. Now, a lot of developers also don't like this because they think, oh, log, where did that come from? So if you want to be more specific where functions come from, especially if they're not your own functions, or maybe even if you have few log functions, maybe you even have a log function in this code right here. Like if you say void log, like this, and then you type log here, I mean, there are so many logs available now. I don't even know which one is which. So what Dart allows you to do is to give an alias to your import. So for instance, if you want to use the log function that is provided in this developer package for you, you can actually give an alias to this entire package in this source file, which is the main Dart file. So you can say I'm going to say DevTools. Okay, so what happens here is that the log function now is not available as it was before, except you have to say DevTools log, and then you'll see that there's a log function, and that's the only function available inside DevTools now because you said show. If you hadn't done the show here, then DevTools will have everything that DevTools, or the developer package in this case, allowed you to or import it into your workspace. Okay, so do the code then as this import DevTools show log. And the reason I'm explaining all of these is because I think these are so important to understand, and that you need to get them like as soon as possible. And now that I'm explaining these things in such detail, I'm not going to explain them anywhere else inside this chapter. So I don't want to have like half explained things that we actually need to fully understand and explain half of it now and then half of it later, because then you may not be able to chain the information to get the entire picture. So that's why I'm explaining things sometimes in such great detail. Okay, now that we've done as DevTools show log, let's go to this print statement that we put here in our notes in the unselected, and then say DevTools log. Okay, and you can see now that it's complaining to us because it says the DevTools log, it doesn't allow us to print a value. And if you have a look at the log function signature, it expects a message of type string, but our MenuAction is an enumeration, but you can always say toString on an enumeration value in order to make it a string. So what we're going to do then is to go and click on this logout, and now you see a log item being printed to the screen. And it's a little bit more distinct as well. You can see now that we're not using print, using log, make sure that your log items are a little bit more distinguished inside the debug console. So that's also a good plus. All right, let's go now to the next item. So what we're going to do here now, we have the logout button here. So I'm going to tap on it. It says logout. We have that already present. What we need to do now is, upon pressing this item, we are going to display a little dialog to the user. Now, if you're a designer, you may be familiar with a dialog, and a dialog is basically like an alert displayed on the screen, depending on what type of operating system you're running on. But both Android and iOS and iPad OS, Mac OS, Windows, everything, they have their own way of handling dialogues. And dialogues are usually like a small little window displayed usually in the center of the main screen where that application is placed. And the dialogues are configurable usually with a title, with the description text, or even images, and usually with some action buttons, which are called CTA, or call to action. So that is the exact same case here in Flutter. So upon pressing this logout button, we're going to display a dialog to the user saying that, oh, we see that you want to log out. Are you sure you want to log out? And then like a cancel or no button and a yes button, which is the call to action, or CTA. Okay. So what we need to do now is to create that function, a function that can display an alert dialog to the user. And you can see here that in the caption I've mentioned, write a logout function to display a dialog. And its signature is kind of like it returns a future of Boolean. And if you really think about it, a dialog that asks the user to log out either has a cancel or a no button, or, sorry, it has either a cancel or no button and a call to action, which does the logout. So it either logs out or it doesn't. Or basically, it either confirms that you need to be logged out, or it says, no, you shouldn't be logged out. So it's true, false. Okay, so a Boolean. So Boolean is perfect for this case. And what we're going to do now is to write a function that returns a future of that Boolean saying true, you have to be logged out, or false, not. And we're going to call it show logout dialog. Okay. So let's go at the bottom of this file and say future bool. And as I've mentioned in the caption, we're going to call it show logout dialog. And we say build context because we need actually context to display our logout button on. Okay, a lot of information. Now, I'm going to go actually a little bit back to the previous caption because I forgot to mention something there. And the important thing to mention here are two things called show dialog and alert dialog. Now, show dialog, actually, let's go to alert dialog first. Alert dialog, you can see, is a class, is a stateless widget, which defines the dialog that gets displayed to the user itself. So it doesn't have any concept of being displayed to the screen or what happens when the dialog is created after that point. It doesn't care about that. So it just performs the action of creating an alert dialog for you. That's for alert dialog, but you need a way to display that alert dialog to the user. And the way to do that is with show, I believe it's called show dialog. And you can see here, show dialog is a function that returns an optional future, or sorry, a future of an optional value. There's a difference between an optional future and a future of an optional value. So in this case, it's a future that always gets returned, but it optionally contains a value, okay? And you can see it says, okay, give me a context, and then you have to provide a builder to me, okay? And this builder should return a widget. So what we're gonna say is gonna say show the dialog, you can see here, and builder, we're going to get help from Visual Studio Code to complete it. All right. And in here, in our builder, what we're going to do is we're going to actually create our alert dialog. Okay. So let's go back to this caption so we know what we're doing, what the actual goal is here. Okay. So in the builder, your responsibility is to create an alert dialog. So let's say we return an alert dialog, which is a widget, as you saw before. And it has a title. You can see the title is a widget, actually, right, like here is a widget. For the title, we're going to create a const of text, and the text I can see we set sign out here. So we're basically configuring the alert dialog, okay? Right now, the title. Then for the contents, or the content also is a widget, and we're going to say this is also a const of text, and we're going to ask the user, are you sure you want to sign out? Okay, just like that. Now that we've put the title and the content in there, we need to specify the parameters called actions. And you can see the type of this actions is a list of widgets. All right. And this is like the buttons that the user will see on this alert dialog. What we're going to do is going to create two text buttons. So I'm going to say text button. All right. And don't worry about all these errors and things that we're seeing here. This is because, as I mentioned in one of the previous chapters, or one of the first introduction chapters, I think, is because we have an extension here called error lens, and error lens is expanding all these errors that are happening as we type, and it's displaying it on the screen. It looks really scary. It looks like we're doing everything wrong, but these errors actually do make sense. If you look at it, it says text button, the named parameter on press is required, but there's no corresponding blah blah. So we need to fix these things. Okay, so let's go to text button and say on pressed, get help from Visual Studio Code to complete it. And then after the on press, say child. So this first button is actually going to be our cancel button. Okay, so that's the first text button, and copy this text button now and paste it in here. And instead of cancel this time, say log out. All right, and like that. Now you see there's a lot less information displayed on the screen, and it looks a lot better. Okay, so now we have an alert with two buttons, cancel, log out, but you can see upon pressing those buttons, we aren't doing anything here, okay? And we need to fix this actually. So let's go ahead and first say we are returning this show dialog, which returns a value of Boolean. And now you see we get a general error here saying that, wait, you said you're returning a future of bool, but this show dialog of bool is going to return an optional bool. So what do you mean? So this is Dart getting a little bit confused, quite correctly actually, is saying that you return a boolean, but we know that show dialog returns an optional boolean. So what do you want to do about it? And a way to fix this, to be honest with you, is you append something called a then function to the entire show dialog, saying that, okay, if the show dialog isn't able to return a boolean, then I'm going to return false. Otherwise, return the value of the show dialog. So because, I mean, you may be now asking, why wouldn't the show dialog return a value? It either has a cancel or a logout button. But remember, on Android, for instance, you have these physical keys. I'm going to change the layout. So you see this button down here. If I show a dialog on the screen, Android users can always press this little button, which will then change to an arrow down. They can press on it to dismiss the dialog. So they have the ability to dismiss a dialog without actually answering the question that the dialog asked them. And iOS users can sometimes also tap outside a dialog in order to cancel that dialog. So that is why show dialog says I may not be able to return the value that I promise kind of to return should the user tap on any of my buttons quite correctly. Okay, so append a then statement. Let me change the screen layout here. So append a then statement here, which is a function that gets called should this future complete. So if the user dismisses this dialog, this future is going to complete, but it won't have a value. You see, it's an optional bool in that case. So in here we say either you return a value if it's present, or you return false. That's it. Okay. Now you see Dart is quite happy about this. All right. Now, what we need to also do is, you see, the way we're gonna display this dialog is to tell Flutter that, hey, this, like, pause everything you're doing and display this dialog modally on the screen. And this dialog is going to grab focus from everything else that's on the screen. So the user kind of has to go and choose an item unless they want to cancel that item by, for instance, pressing the physical key on an Android phone. Now, when we display the dialog, we're going to use the build context and the navigator and display the screen just like we display like a named route. So the show dialog function here inside our text buttons on press, it is our responsibility as the alert dialog to dismiss ourselves. And it's our responsibility to actually pass a value to this show dialog and say, hey, this button was pressed and this is the value that it returned. So what you need to do on these unpressed is to say navigator of context, and then you'll say pop, and then you provide your value, the Boolean value in this case. So upon canceling, we'll pop with the value of false, and we copy this code and we go into the unpress of the second text button, which is logout. And in this case, we say that you should basically return true. All right. That was a lot of code. I understand that. Let's just make sure formatting is correct as well. Put commas here before your parentheses end. So the formatting is a little bit nicer in that case. So that's our show logout dialog function. Now, as the caption says, what we need to do is to go and display this dialog to the user. And the way to do that is upon the user tapping this logout button here, you see the value is a menu action. So what we're going to do is going to do a switch statement. So we say switch value. And what I really like about this warning that we're getting here is saying that missing cause clause for logout, Dart is already understanding that there's a case statement and there's a case in this menu action enumeration that we're not handling, and it's asking us to do that. So you could tap on this little here icon and say add missing case clauses, or you can say command dot on Mac or control dot on Linux and Windows to bring up this menu also. And I've also understood from my conversations with others on LinkedIn that this option is also available on Vim and other editors, because this is part of the language front end actually. So it's not only a thing you can do in Visual Studio Code, thankfully. So go and add the missing case clauses. And in this case, what we need to do now is to display our alert. So we're going to say await should log out or something. And we say, final should log out is equal to await. And now we're going to call this function that we created, show logout dialog. Okay. And now it's complaining, saying that you can't do await because this function here on selected is not asynchronous. So now we're going to make it asynchronous, and then we're going to say DevTools log should log out to a string. Okay. So Command S, and let's go to our UI now. And I'm going, because we're doing DevTools log, I'm going to bring up the debug console here, clear it so you see better. And I'm going to press the log out. Now you see our dialog is displayed to the user saying sign out. Are you sure you want to sign out with our buttons? Pressing the cancel button, we're then going to come to the unselected here and get the value of false. Boof. You see right there. Pressing the same button again, saying log out, and then log out here. We're going to get the value of true. Wow, that was also a lot of information. So I'm just going to go to my notes and ensure that I've explained everything that I wanted to explain. All right. And that was done. Now that we've displayed, now that we can actually display a dialog to the user, get the true and false values back, we need to also ensure that we're actually logging out from Firebase as well. So if true or false isn't enough, we need to log out from Firebase. And the way to do that, as you can see in the code here, in the caption says Firebase auth instance sign out. Okay. So what we need to do then is to call that function. So we say in here, let me bring up my notes. So we say if should log out, then we are going to do that, because you see this should log out says true if you do have to log out and false if you don't have to. So we just made sure that it's true. Okay, so you can either say if should log out, or you can say if it shouldn't log out, then return. And then you do the actual logout after this. So it completely depends on your style. I'm just going to do if should log out because it makes more like grammatical sense for me. If I should log out, then do this, than saying if I shouldn't log out, don't do this. So it's a little bit of a preference, but you're free to choose your own style as you go on. So let's say Firebase auth instance, as we can see here, and then we say sign out. You can see that it returns a future, a void. So let's call it, and then we say wait. Oof. All right. And now that we've done that, After we sign the user out, then there's no point keeping the user in this user interface, because this user interface is only for people who are logged into the application, and signing out from Firebase means that, well, you're not logged out anymore, okay? Or you're not signed in anymore. Sorry, you're not logged in anymore, signed in anymore. They could be used interchangeably, sign in or log in, and log out and sign out depends of the lingo that you prefer to use in your project. I also use these terms interchangeably. So if I say sometimes sign out or log out, you know what I mean. All right. In this case, after you sign out, we also want to send you to the login screen, because that's like in my opinion, at least, is the most common thing to do. If you sign out of an application, you then go back to the login screen. Okay. Otherwise, if you, for instance, are developing a website, and then there is like a forum website or something, and the user goes and logs out, you may send them then to, not to the login page, but you may actually send them to like a read-only copy of all the forms available in your website. But since we don't have any content to display to a user who has signed out, the only thing we can display to them is the login screen, because we don't have any other content to display. Okay, so upon signing out, we're gonna send you to the login screen. So let's do that now. So we're gonna say navigator, as you can see in the caption of our context. And then we're saying push remove, push named and remove until, and then we're going to say login. Leave like that. And we don't need the route. And just like that, Command S. All right, does this make sense? So let's then see if this works. So let's have a look at that. Let me also go to my notes to ensure that I'm explaining everything. Yep. Great. And let's just make sure that sign out is working. Okay, so log out, we say no, just to test that that is working, and then log out, and then we say log out here. And I can see I'm even using the language like interchangeably here, which is not a good idea. Are you sure you want to sign out and then a log out button? It's not perfect, but it works. You're free to change this if you want to. And then if you say log out, then we should go back to the login screen. Perfect. That is working, but something isn't working quite right, and I'll tell you soon. But before we do that, let's go to the terminal and go to here. I have two terminals, one for strcpy, and the other terminal is for doing commits messages. I'm going to bring up actually so you see it better. So what we need to do, as we've done in the previous chapters, now that we have Git and GitHub set up, let's commit our work, and we're going to call this step 3. Okay. So that's what we're going to do now. We are going to commit our work, and we're also going to tag it. So let's say git status, just to have a look at what we've changed. I can see that there's only changes in the main Dart file, and you can also say git diff, so you can see what you've changed. You see, all the green ones are new, and all the red ones are things that you've basically removed or replaced with new content. For instance, this one was removed, this one was removed, and this one was added. All right. So quite a bit of information here. Let's say git add all. So we add all those to the staging environment in order to commit them. And then I'm going to say git commit with a message of step 3. And let's have a look at our logs. I can see initial commit, which is step 1, and then step 2, and then step 3. And then you will push these changes or push the commits to GitHub. All right. Now I'm going to clear the terminal here, and we'll also need to tag our code. Remember, commits are not the same thing as tags. So I'm going to say git tag step 3 and push your tags as well. All right. So that pushed the tags as well. Great. Wow, that was a lot of work. But I have to kind of say congratulations for you to keep up with me in this chapter as we went through all these different bits and pieces that we had to put in place for the logout to work. But logout is such an integral part of our application that I think it's worth spending some time explaining how things are working. I also talk about a little bit of like basics of the show dialog, menu items, pop-ups, etc. So once we talk about them now, we don't have to talk more about them later. Remember, I told you something isn't quite working right here. And that's what we're going to fix in the next chapter, which is fixing the login screen. And I'll tell you what isn't working. If you now go in here and put your email address and put your password in, you can see pressing login doesn't do anything. It just logs you into the application. Because if you go to login view and we have a look at the code that we wrote here, let me get rid of the console here. If you look at the button that was pressed, upon pressing it, all we're doing is just we're doing a print user credential. And you can see that if you go here, oh, I can see I actually got wrong password. So let me go and say foo_bar_baz. Boom. Now we got the user credential here, you see, but still nothing worked. Even if you provide the correct user credentials, then it's not working as it should. And by that, I mean, it's not taking you to the next step. What should happen in the next step? All right. So that is what we're going to fix in the next chapter. We're going to work on fixing the login view. So for this chapter, all you and I did is to take care of our main user interface. We got rid of that ugly done text widget that we were displaying at the end of the previous chapter. And we have now a main UI with a menu bar item on top right, and pressing that displays a pop-up menu, which has an enum item in it. Upon pressing which, then you get a dialog. And then if you cancel, you go back to the main UI. And if you say log out or sign out, you go back to the login view. So there was a lot of work that we did, and congratulations for you for keeping up. So get ready then. Whatever you want to do, get some refreshments, and we will fix our login screen in the next chapter.